Hi everyone, this is Koinzell here. So I know it's been a long time since my last video, and unfortunately I had a bit of a family situation, more on my wife's side. So yeah, crazy busy for the past 2 weeks. Finally, things have more or less stabilized. It's not completely resolved, but it's stabilized. So that's why I'm able to do a video now. So in the interest of time, because I do not have enough time to do the other comps, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to simply talk about the Nahida Nilou Bloomcomb variants, specifically the 2D2H, which is like 2 Dendro, 2 Hydro, versus the 1D3H, which is 1 Dendro, 3 Hydro. And we will have the Hydro triggers, Dendro triggers, etc. And I'll do a ranking between the three variants and for you guys' reference, yeah. Okay, so let's go dive right in. This will not be a long video because I'm mainly talking about the comps, but there will be a bit of comparison as well. So like I said, there's three variants, right? 2D, 2H with Hydro triggers. That's as per my Nahida Math Guide 2. Okay. And then you have the 1D, 3H. So I actually mentioned this Nahida Math Guide 2 as well on the elemental application instances, right? And all the specific caveats related to it. I'll elaborate a bit more here as well. More stuff here, other than those that I've covered previously. And we'll talk about 1D3H Dendro, which obviously is just the Nahida, right? With Nahida being the single trigger. So next, I will go dive right into the 2D2H Hydro triggers. Now, obviously, I've already cleared this. I've gone through a lot of detail for this in the Nahida Math Guide 2. So please refer to that for the full details. All I'm doing here is going to be very simple. It's just going to be a comparison between the DMC Collei versus the DMC Nahida. I actually did a brief comparison in Nahida Math Guide 2, but not in terms of percentage. So here goes. So these are the figures for the Nahida with DMC in a 2D2H comp. The blue figures are the ones where basically this is the ones that we will compare later because this is the best set. Now for the EM damage CD and the attack damage CD, they are more or less the same. In fact, I think it's better to go for the EM damage CD as per what I've talked about in Nahida Math Guide 2. But to make things easy, I'll just compare everything that's on these two columns. Because the DMC Collei figures here also have this as the best permutation, the best artifact permutation. Okay. So let's look at the comparison itself. So we have some nice figures here, right? At C0 you have 34, 38, and at C6 you have up to 79%. When it's 2 plus enemies, this obviously drops because we are talking about the constellation, the talent damage. At C0 it's 19, at C6 is 53%, at R1 anyway. Now, before you go, whoa, DMC Nahida is so much better than DMC Collei, based on just the percentage figures, please bear in mind these few important things. Number one, the comparison includes Nahida talent damage versus Nilou talent damage, because I just took the figures from the previous math guides due to lack of time on my part. So in other words, right, it's not a exact one-to-one comparison per se, but it's okay because in terms of the overall team DPS, Nahida does contribute this amount of talent damage anyway. So it's not something that is far off in terms of your overall team DPS. It's there. Like the only difference we have here is Nahida versus Collei, right? And most folks, I don't think their Collei are well built enough that the damage difference is going to be significant versus Nahida. So I think it's okay for the percentage comparison to be as such. Okay. Which is the reason why I actually went to do this. Otherwise, I wouldn't even do this if I think it's too unfair. Okay. So the reason why the percentage figures are lower against 2 plus enemies obviously is because of the talent damage, right? Because Nahida's talent damage wouldn't scale with the bountiful cost. Simple as that. So that's number one. Number two, you gotta remember that this assumes a full duration is met in order for the advantage of the DMC Nahida to be met, which is our first batch of figures here, right? Because we are saying that Nahida provides you a longer Dendro duration, thus allowing you to trigger more bounties on top of other buffs, which I will talk about as well. So obviously, if you are already tearing through mobs with your DMC Collei now, and it's before your DMC Collei Dendro application ends, you actually wouldn't see as big of a difference in terms of bountiful cost. So take for example, if you've ever gone to watch my stream, the Twitch stream, when I use Nilou, right, in a 2D 2H com with DMC and Collei in say Gilded Dreams artifact farming. I know that's not Spiral Beast, but I'm already melting through Spiral Beast anyway. You'll notice that everything dies before the Dendro application ends anyway. So in that scenario, Nahida is not going to give you an advantage. That's what I'm trying to say here. Okay, what I'm trying to say here is that Nahida's advantage, this percentage advantage here, especially before C2, you really only see it if your enemies last longer than the current DMC Collei Dendro application in a 2D2H setup. So basically, if that's the case, right, if it doesn't last long enough already, the main advantage that Nahida brings to you will be her talent damage itself, her EM buff from her Q, right, because that still happens, provided it happens to be on the Hedro character when you're doing the procs, and your C2 effect if you have C2, because C2 allows her the bountiful cost to crit. So talking about the bountiful cost, right? When you see Nahida C2 together with Nilou C2, it does provide a substantial difference. We have almost a double jump, right? 19 to 28%, or if you want to say C1, it's 27 to 48, still almost double. Not exactly double, but close. So it's a pretty substantial difference, as can be seen from the percentage figures. For DMC Nahida versus DMC Collei, yes, DMC Nahida is definitely better. But if you're already melting stuff now with DMC Collei Nilou Bloomcom, you may be better off using Nahida in other comps, because Nahida is also very flexible in terms of her comps. Okay, so just bear this in mind. Now I finished talking about 2D2H. Let me just go to 1D3H Hydro triggers. So quite a long stretch, but bear with me. It's pretty detailed analysis. So in terms of the overall elemental application instances, how many we can achieve with a 3 hydro, with hydro triggers with 3H, right? 1D3H, right? Please refer to Nahida Math Guide 2 for the details, but I can tell you it's about 1.5x to 2x more, depending on the combat scenario, the enemy's situation. But I want to add some points here, which is mainly about the challenges for the 1D3H. Because first challenge, you will need a suitable candidate for the third hydro slot that does not overtake the Dendro aura from Nahida. A C2 Yelan or a C6 Xingqiu may be too much hydro, and I have to test it out to be sure, but it does look like it may be too much hydro, in theory wise. It's a bit too close, you see, so I can't say for sure whether it's too much hydro or maybe it may be just right. Now, alternative options, if you don't use Yelan or Xingqiu, would be, say, using someone like Ayato with only his Q used, or even a C6 Candace, because of how C6 Candace effect works, allowing her to still provide off-field elemental application. Okay, without C6 Candace, you don't really even need to consider Candace, because there's no off-field elemental application, other than the tree swapping instances that she provides from her Q. When you swap, it triggers the Hydro thingy. So you definitely want a C6 Candace if you want to use Candace in 1D3H con. And I'll talk more about Candace later. But effectively, she does have a potential because she provides damage potential buff that's pretty good for Nahida, because remember it's 1D3H, so your Nahida will be doing the normal attacks. Okay. Now that's point number one. Point number one, having a candidate that's suitable for the third Hydro without overtaking your Dendro aura so that you maintain the Hydro triggers. But if you remember what I mentioned in Math Guide 2, it doesn't even matter if it gets overwritten, because your even if Nahida becomes a Dendro trigger, you still pretty much do the same as 2D2H. But if it doesn't, then you definitely do more. With the Hydro triggers, you definitely have more bountiful costs, for sure. So the other point here is about having enough EM team buffs. Because if you think about it, right, your third Hydro character has to be able to provide some sort of EM team buffs, maybe it for Pace Instructor or even Allergy. Because we are losing Dendro Resonance and EM team buff from the Dendro character. Okay, for Collei, right? If you don't have C4 Collei, then you don't have that 60 EM, right? But you are still losing the Dendro resonance, which is about 80 EM, because this is a bloom comb, there is no second stat reaction. Right now, unfortunately, Yelan with allergy looks like the best option. But you do sacrifice some of Yelan's talent damage, and that's something that I don't really like. Obviously, this issue is resolved if you have R5 key. But how many people have R5 key, right? Yeah. So anyway, this is one point I want to bring up. And the next point is about whether getting the 200 to 300 EM is acceptable for the third Hydro character or even more. Okay. So for Nilou and Kokomi, there's no problem getting some EM for them because they can afford to in terms of how their build works. They are not as stat hungry as the other characters. In fact, my Kokomi has like 600 plus EM now before buffs. She's doing fantastically, to be honest. Like 40 plus K bountiful cost right now with R5. Yes, I went for R5 key. The main thing is that getting EM doesn't affect their core role for Nilou and Kokomi. In fact, it is core for Nilou, and for Kokomi it doesn't affect her core role. Right? She still is able to heal sufficient amount. But if you use Yelan, it's painful to get EM on her since her talent damage is really good. So that EM really feels very wasted. This is what I mean by this point here, whether getting some EM is acceptable for the third Hydro character. So now I need to mention Candace again. Why? Because Candace can actually go full HP with some EM just like Nilou and Kokomi. So she's looking more suitable as third Hydro, right? But again, remember, you need C6 Candace. If you don't have C6 Candace, we don't even need to talk about this. Simple as that. Oh, and the other thing about Candace is that she can actually use 4 DM. Since it's actually better than 4 Nobles for her in the Bloomcom, I will argue that it contributes a lot more. Since Bloomcom mainly focus on your Bloom core, bountiful core damage, right? Not to mention you have Hydro HP scaling characters in there. So the attack percentage buff from 4 Nobles is even more useless. So if somehow you have C6, if you do have C6 Candace, you put her as a third Hydro character, she can either use 4 DM and allow Nilou to go 2 DM, 2 GD, or 4 DM. Oh, sorry, 4 GD. Why did I say 4 DM? 4 GD. So that's good. Okay, so these are some of the benefits I see for having Candace. I never realized it, but yeah, it seems like I have finally found a suitable use for Candace. Maybe that is MiHoYo's or HoYover's design to begin with, yeah? So to conclude for these three challenges for the 1D3H, right? Basically, 1D3H Hydro triggers give you the highest damage, the highest potential. More than 1D3H Dendro triggers for sure. But I can't recommend it in good faith for F2P. Why? Because you need an EM team buff to optimize this, and maybe C6 Candace, depending on whether Yelan is too much Hydro. And EM team buff weapons are not exactly F2P, right? You have the what do you call that? You have the allergy and key, both of which are 5-star weapons. They are on the 5-star. They are on the signature weapon banner. So it's probably better for F2P to go for 1D3H Dendro trigger or 2D2H Hydro triggers if your Nilou and Kokomi is already well built for Hydro triggers, i.e. you have already followed my math guide, you have built your Kokomi and Nilou well, then honestly you can just stick with this 2D2H instead of going 1D3H. 1D3H is really for the folks who really only want to build EM on only one character. But I'll talk more about that later here. Okay. Now, regardless of all this, I will still test out Yelan with allergy to see if it fits or if C6 Candace is better. Okay. Now I know not many folks will have C6 Candace, but she does fit the comp well. To be honest, she really does fit the comp well. Alright, let's talk about 1D3H Dendro triggers. I'll say that this is the most F2P friendly setup because you only need to build high EM on Nahida, who requires it as part of a kit anyway, and you can afford to go as much HP as you want on Nilou. But I'll still recommend getting some EM on Nilou, and I'll talk more about that later in the con session. And more importantly, you don't need the EMT buffs from weapons for the Hydro characters. You preferably you would still want it for the Nahida, but at least you don't need it on the Hydro, right? I mean, imagine you're talking about 1D3H where I need decent enough EM on the 3 Hydro characters versus 1D3H where I only need EM, high EM on the high or decent EM on the Dendro. Now the other thing is that you don't need to worry about interviewing Dendro and Hydro to ensure Hydro triggers. Just set up 2 to 3 Hydro characters of your Hydro and then you just apply Dendro. That's it. So it's more idiot proof, I guess. But these are the pros. Okay, these are the pros. Let's talk about the cons. The fall off in damage from accidentally overwriting Hydro Aura here is much bigger than in the Hydro Triggers comp when you accidentally overwrite the Dendro Aura. Because your Hydro characters here will have very low EM other than maybe Nilou. So in the 2D2H comp or even the 1D3H Hydro Triggers comp, it doesn't matter because everyone has high EM. If you build them correctly, everyone pretty much has high EM or decent enough EM or high enough EM. So it doesn't matter if it falls off, if one of the trigger wasn't correct. In theory, it should not happen, right? Because we are trying to make sure that we have enough Hydro. And that should be doable with someone like something like Yelan or Xingqiu. But there can be scenarios where your Hydro still did not manage to hit a newly spawned enemy, for example, and you apply your Dendro first before the Hydro. It's definitely possible. In terms of how Nilou works. Oh, sorry, in terms of how Nahida works. I'm not writing it out, but I just want to call out that when this scenario happens, you'll see your Bountiful Core dealing very little damage. Or rather, it's not very little damage, but it's much lower than a fully optimized Bountiful Core damage. Because if you remember my math for Nahida, my math for Nilou, when your Nilou has high enough HP, if your EM is not too high, you still deal more than a typical Hyper Bloom scenario. Okay. Now, this is one of the disadvantage. I want to talk about another disadvantage will be in terms of the overall elemental application instances. It's actually around the same as a 2D2H Hydro Trigger. It's about the same. But the overall rate of application may be slower. Oh, sorry. Actually, it's around the same without Nahida. Okay, a 2D2H Hydro Trigger without Nahida is about the same as a 1D3H Dendro Trigger in terms of the number of procs that you'll be getting. Number of bountiful cores that you'll be spawning. But if it's a 2D2H Hydro Trigger with Nahida, you actually get slightly more. And you'll see why in terms of my ranking, it kind of reflects that as well. But one most important thing to me is that the overall rate of application may be slower because it's one character triggering versus two characters. So the 2D2H Hydro Trigger will be more bursty in nature. And if you have seen my stream, you know, if you've seen in action, you know that the so-called 2 per 0.5 seconds per enemy limit is not easy to hit at all. You still see, if you execute it correctly, you'll still see the bounty force going off don't stop, dealing a ton of damage. Yeah, I actually demonstrated it on stream yesterday. Okay, at the point of me recording this video. Okay, yesterday from the point of me recording this video and publishing this video. Yep, so that's that. So let me give you guys a ranking, sort of like a TLDR of the three Nahida Nilou variants that I've talked about. So if I really have to rank the three variants, I'll rank it as the 1D3H Hydro Trigger as the first. Then you have the 2D2H Hydro Trigger, because remember what I talked about with Nahida, you get more cores, more bountiful cores. Even without Nahida, right, it's about the same. This is why I put a more than equal, but it's really more than actually. Okay, if you do it correctly, like what I have done in the Nilou comp or the Nahida Math Guide 2. Now, one thing to note is that this ranking is not just in terms of damage, it's also caution in your execution and the F2P unfriendliness per se. Unfriendliness per se. Okay, I'll explain this. So essentially, the higher the damage, i.e. the 1D3H Hydro Trigger comp, the higher the caution required in terms of your execution, and the less F2P friendly it is. So what do I mean by caution in execution? It simply means whether or not you need to interweave the Dendro and Hydro, and just take note of that. That's all. But if you follow my math guide so far, even if you mess it up, it's fine because your other characters still have high EM. You see where I'm coming from? Although you do get lesser cost, right? If you end up having Dendro triggers on the 2D2H. But I think you know what I mean here. It's just a caution in terms of execution. If you follow my rotation in the Nilou math guides, it's not hard at all to interweave the Dendro and Hydro. It is the reason why I didn't use the phrase difficulty in execution, because it's not difficult. You just need to take extra caution. That's it. Just take note of it. Or if you don't take note of it, just follow my rotation. Damn, it's done. And in terms of F2P friendliness, I think I've talked about this, right? For 1D3H, because you need it to be EM on one character, you don't, technically speaking, you don't really need the EM team buffs as compared to, say, the 2D2H or the 1D3H, where you want high EM on more characters, more than one character. So that's where the allergy and the key of Kaishnitsu comes in, right? So to be honest, I've talked so much, right? Let me just quickly summarize, okay? If you have already followed my Nilou math guides and optimized your Nilou and Kokomi's HP and EM, I would actually recommend sticking with 2D2H Hydro triggers instead of going 1D3H Dendro trigger, even if their performance is similar. And the performance similar portion, actually, remember what I said, right? It's only in a 2D2H without Nahida, which is a DMC Collei comp, that the number of bountiful costs are actually the same. If it's a Nahida, DMC Nahida, the number of costs are actually more. You actually have more bountiful costs than a 1D3H. Slightly more. About 4 to 5 more. Okay, not a lot, I know, but it's about 4 to 5 more. Which is also a reason why I'm okay putting a more than equal here rather than just more than. Okay? So really, if you have followed my math guides, you have optimized your Nilou and Kokomi's HP and EM, just go with the 2D2H Hydro trigger. And utilize your Nahida in other comps for Abyss. Or better yet, if it's not in Abyss, you can also use your Nahida in the 2D2H Hydro trigger. I will only recommend 1D3H Hydro trigger. Sorry, this should be Dendro trigger. I will only recommend 1D3H Dendro triggers for folks. Oh, wait, sorry. It is Hydro. I thought I was talking about the Nahida being the trigger. No. Okay, so this is still the 3H Hydro trigger. I will only recommend this for folks who have allergy and key of Night Kaishnitsu, which is why I say that it's not as F2P friendly. But even then, I still need to test out the best Hydro character. If Yelan is too much Hydro, then you just need key, R5 key, or rather you can just use key. Right? It's not need. Then you just need key. Okay, technically speaking, it's correct to say that as well. But Yelan is your allergy holder, right? If you don't have Yelan, or Yelan is just too much Hydro, then it's Candice. And I think the beauty of R5 key is starting to come in here, right? Because R5 key gives you easily gives you 300 EM to the entire team. It's freaking crazy. Okay, so I'll say it's essentially tougher to execute / optimize the 1D3H Hydro triggers, but you get better damage as reward. And the better damage is ranges from anything from 1.5x to 2x, depending on whether you hit the maximum number of bountiful costs based on the number of enemies. If you constantly have 2+ enemies all the way, you can theoretically even hit 2x. But realistically speaking, I'll say it's more like 1.5x the 1D3H Dendro trigger. Or the 2D2H Hydro trigger without Nahida, the DMC Collei. Okay? So if you have not done so, in terms of this portion here, if you have not optimized your Nilou and Kokomi's HP and EM, or maybe you only optimize Nilou, you didn't optimize Kokomi, and you insist on going single character trigger, by all means go ahead with 1D3H Dendro trigger, even though I would still recommend 2D2H Hydro trigger with Kokomi and Nilou optimized. Because I realized it's actually very easy to optimize Kokomi. I literally just took the spare pieces that I have and I just upgraded them and got them. A bit of luck involved, but not very lucky per se. Okay, so extremely easy to pump up Kokomi's EM and HP. which is the reason why I recommend 2D2H over the 1D3H Dendro trigger. But if your mind is set on just having a single character trigger like in Hyper Bloom, right? Which works for Hyper Bloom because of how it works, how Hyper Bloom works in terms of reaction. Then by all means, do your 1D3H Dendro trigger. But I wouldn't really recommend it over the 2D2H Hydro trigger. Okay. But you can definitely do so. Nothing wrong with doing this. It works. It will work perfectly fine. And in fact, like I said, it's easier. It's more edit proof because you don't care about interweaving the Dendro and Hydro. So technically speaking, I would say that the 1D3H is Dendro trigger is the most F2P friendly and the easiest to execute. Although the Hydro triggers are not that much more difficult to execute anyway. But yeah, this is how I will rank these 3 variants. Okay. So that's the end of my video for today. And I know it's not a full complete for the 1D3H per se. But looking at the interest in how should I put it? Due to the lack of time, in the interest of time, I think it's better for me to do this based on this level of analysis and go on to do the weapon comparison and constellation refinement comparison, so that I'm able to do all this before Nahida is released. It's going to be challenging, but I'll try my best. Okay. Luckily, the constellation refinement comparison should be easier. Yeah, it's the weapon comparison that might take a bit more time. But for the weapon comparison, I'll probably do the aggro spread comparison, because it doesn't really make too much of a difference for the between the Nahida Nilou and the Nahida aggravate, unless you are talking about 1D3H Dendro triggers. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, thanks everyone for watching. Again, let me apologize for the long break due to the personal situation that I have. And if you like the content, remember the video and click subscribe for more. Bye.